By now, we've all either heard or seen the show Wayward, new on Netflix. But what if I told you that this show, although it's fiction on Netflix, it's the real life trauma of so many hundreds of thousands of teens? Tonight, we're going to pull back the veil on Wayward and show you exactly what this movie was really portraying and what's behind the scene of one of the most devastating traumas that has occurred in this country. There's an industry in the United States that allows strangers to remove a child from their home without warning. No court order, no charges, no crime, just a signature. They call it treatment. But behind closed doors, it often feels more like severe mistreatment. And by the end of this episode, you'll understand how it became legal, who benefits from it, and why no one talks about it. It starts like this. A girl is asleep in her bed. It's 3:17 in the morning. Her door flies open. Two unidentified adults rush in, large, fast, with no badges. They escort her and she cries out. Her mom is standing in the hallway crying. Her dad turns his back. She pleads, "Please don't let them take me." They say nothing. She's taken outside barefoot, her arms held, no phone, no goodbye, no idea of where she's going. She won't return home for many months. And this isn't a horror movie. It's policy. It's legal. And it happens to families across America. Kids feel like they're being kidnapped, and their families are just standing by watching without a fight. The betrayal feeling is immense and devastating. Now stop and ask yourself, what would this mean if it was your daughter, your son, your little brother? This isn't about a few bad apples or one broken program. This is a billion-dollar industry built on silence, rebranding, and psychological manipulation. And tonight, for the first time, you'll hear directly from someone who actually survived it. In this episode, we'll expose how these teen programs operate without oversight, the covert-style methods hiding inside therapy, who benefits financially from the system, and how media might be helping cover it up. Because once you see how deep it goes, you'll never look at the words troubled teen the same way again. This is Divergent Files. This isn't just a few bad programs. It's an industry. An unregulated $1.2 billion a year system that lets private companies, churches, and even hedge funds assume authority over your child without a single judge or jury. They call it behavior therapy. Survivors call it psychological manipulation with paperwork. And here's the part nobody talks about. It's legal in all 50 states. It's called the troubled teen industry, a mix of wilderness camps, Christian academies, boot camps, and residential treatment centers. What they all have in common? They promise desperate parents that they can fix their kid fast. But what actually happens behind those locked doors is something way different. Some kids are shipped off for skipping class, some for talking back, some just for being depressed, and worse, some for being born a bit neurodivergent and their families not quite sure how to handle their divergence. Parents sign a few forms, write a big fat check, and that's it. The program takes over custody, and the kid is gone. The parents think they're sending their child to therapy, but the reality feels more like a high-control facility with inspirational posters on the wall. According to the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, over 120,000 kids go through these programs every year. Most of them never see a licensed therapist. A 2021 Government Accountability Office report called these programs a patchwork of state laws and loopholes with virtually no federal oversight. Translation, it's the wild, wild west, and the sheriff's on vacation. Some programs are run by churches, others by private equity. Some are nonprofits in name only, still charging $10,000 a month. And the mistreatment? It doesn't always leave bruises. We're talking isolation rooms, sleep restriction, imposed silence, emotional pressure, and in many cases, pressured admissions just to earn back the right to eat, speak, or even go outside. And maybe that sounds extreme, but it's not a theory. In 2020, over 400 survivors signed a petition demanding federal action. Among them, Paris Hilton. She called her experience at Provo Canyon School traumatizing and harmful. She wasn't there for violence or drugs. She was there because she didn't listen to her parents. And here's where things get even stranger. Some of the exact techniques used in these teen programs, they matched what the CIA once used to control detainees. So, how did $1 billion therapy business end up looking like a covert conditioning program? And who built this system? Because it didn't appear out of nowhere. And the deeper we go, the more it starts to look intentional. Let's talk about how the system got built and how it stayed hidden. The government didn't just look the other way, they wrote the loopholes. There are over 100,000 kids in the troubled teen system every year, and not a single federal law regulates what happens to them. Let that sink in. You need more paperwork to rent a bouncy house than to send your kid to a lockdown program. To understand how this became legal, we have to go back to the 1960s. That's when a drug rehab organization called Synanon started experimenting on people. Not with medicine, with behavioral control. They used sleep restriction, group humiliation, and confrontation therapy, where people yelled at you for hours until you broke down crying. They said it was healing. It looked more like severe conditioning with a self help soundtrack. Now, here's where it jumps the rails. Parents started asking Synanon to help fix their kids. So, Synanon created the teen version of their program. And the results? Let's just say it didn't go great. But the idea stuck. Fast forward to the 1980s, a new group pops up called Straight Inc. They promised to treat rebellious teens. What they actually did was restrain kids to walls, strip them of their clothing, and force them to listen to hours of indoctrination lectures. In 1993, Straight Inc. was shut down after a string of lawsuits. But instead of disappearing, they just changed names. And this would become the industry's favorite trick. When things got hot, you rebrand, relocate, you reopen. And that brings us to the WWASP, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs. Sounds nice, right? Well, it was actually a massive umbrella company that ran dozens of these facilities around the world. Places like Provo Canyon, the school in Utah, Ivy Ridge in New York, Agape boarding school in Missouri, Elon School in Maine. They weren't licensed medical facilities. They didn't need to be. They were private or church run. And that's how they got away with everything. Many operated under religious exemptions, which legally allow certain faith based programs to avoid regulation, even when treating minors. Others exploited loopholes in state law. In some states, anyone can open a boarding school without proving they're trained in education, therapy, or medicine. The system didn't fail by accident. It was built this way. And the money? Well, that's where it gets wild. IRS 990 forms show that some of these nonprofits were pulling in millions per year, charging up to $12,000 a month per kid while hiring barely trained staff at minimum wage. Some facilities were funded by hedge funds or tied to religious megadonors who viewed the programs as moral correction. In 2021, the Senate Finance Committee released a report exposing this entire web, and even they said, quote, "The current system is not designed to protect children." And maybe it never was. A lot of these parents weren't evil. They were just scared out of their mind. They were told your child is out of control. We're the only ones who can fix them. And when you're drowning, you'll grab whatever rope they throw you, even if it turns out to be a lifeline with a hook. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. If this was just about desperate parents and broken systems, why do the methods used in these places look so much like military training or CIA covert operations? Because what came next wasn't therapy, it was designed to break you. She had to earn the right to speak, not because she broke a rule, but because the staff said she wasn't ready. For days, she couldn't talk. She wasn't allowed to look anyone in the eye. She had to sit in silence alone. She was 14 years old and she was in therapy. These programs weren't just strict, they were designed to break you down mentally, physically, emotionally until you do anything to get out. The first step, get you out of your home without warning. It's called a midnight extraction. Some survivors call it escorted transport or gooning. Private transport agents, usually two large men, show up at your house at 3 a.m. You're pulled from bed, handcuffed, and driven across state lines to a facility you've never heard of. These escorts are legal, no warrant needed. Parents sign a waiver, and that's it, you're gone. Once inside the program, the rules change. It starts the moment they take you. Do you remember the day you arrived? What stands out the most about that moment?
Yes. So I remember a very long, winding road. It must have been a half hour off of the main road, right into the wilderness. And there were a lot of hills surrounding it. And even before I kind of understood what this facility was, and I still was under the impression it was a camp, I still felt almost trapped in it. There was just this heaviness. The other thing I remember were the horses. I have since found out that the equine therapy was a major selling point for my mom. She thought it would be a very positive therapeutic place, especially because I had always loved horses. I still do today. Um, Unfortunately, there was no equine therapy. There was just shoveling the manure that was then sold for profit. There was no riding the horses, there was not even grooming the horses. It was shoveling manure. That was also one of their favorite punishments.
You don't get normal meals. You don't get phone calls. You don't get your name. You're now a level 1. Leaked documents from Breaking Code Silence show that nearly every major facility used some version of a level system. Level 1 means no talking, no eye contact, no bathroom without permission, no food unless earned. If you disobey, you're sent to Reflection, a windowless room with no bed, just a floor. Former staff from Agape boarding school testified under oath that kids were forced to lie face down on the floor for hours, sometimes days, until they learned submission. At the Elon school, students were forced to hit each other in public, ring sessions. Refusing to hit someone meant you were next. Imagine being 14, starving, alone, and told you can't speak until you confess to something you didn't even do. Some kids gave in fast, some held out, but eventually everyone breaks. And that was the point. Because the system isn't just about punishment, it's about control. The staff used behavior modification to shape everything: who you could talk to, what words you could say, even how you sat. One survivor said, quote, "You learned how to cry without making a sound, because if they heard you cry, you'd get reset to level 1." According to internal training manuals leaked from multiple facilities, staff were told to withhold sleep as punishment. Every day was the same, and that was the point. So, what did a normal day look like inside if you could walk us through that?
So, a normal day, we would wake up in our cabins. It was one big room with bunk beds. We were forced to sleep in nothing but our underwear. This would be all months of the year. And this was supposedly because it would reduce run risks. So all of our belongings were in locked foot lockers. So we would wake up, they would unlock our foot lockers, we would get dressed and form a circle where we would go over our tasks for the day. But the main thing I remember is just the constant manual labor. Uh, we would march single file down a hill with an unpaved path. So we would do various things. Some of them that are the most prominent in my mind were constructing a new kitchen. So we were the ones who did that. So I remember putting a pack of shingles on all of our backs and then going back up the unpaved hill. A pack of shingles, it was roughly 80 pounds. Keep in mind, I think the youngest girl in our group was 12 years old. So they expected every single person, including that 12-year-old girl, to go up the hill. Luckily at the time, like I mentioned, I had been in sports, so I was capable of doing it, but a lot of girls were falling into ravines, into rocks. And this was also at nighttime, and we weren't provided with the flashlights. We had to have them and the batteries. So we'd be lucky if it was more than 2 functional ones at that time. So imagine a group of 10, 12 girls, some of them quite young, with 80 pounds strapped to their back, going through the wilderness. Another one that I remember is when we were in charge of the landscaping. This would be acres and acres of landscaping, and sometimes the grass had grown so tall in places we couldn't use lawnmowers. So they would give us these long sickles, which is basically like a long stick with a sharp blade at the end, and we would swing it for hours and hours to cut the long grass. We weren't able to use razors in the shower, but they trusted us with those long sickles when it benefited them. And besides that, we would do the cooking, we would do the cleaning. Honestly, considering we were doing the construction, cooking, cleaning, landscaping, I don't really know who they were paying. There weren't even licensed therapists. In all the months I was there, the only time I saw a psychiatrist was at intake. I've talked to some people who said they only saw a psychiatrist 2-3 times in the entire 18 months plus that they were there. So pretty much anything that happened there, it happened on our backs with our labor.
And here's where the trap door swings open. These level systems didn't come from therapists. They're built on B.F. Skinner's behaviorist model, the same one used in military conditioning and animal testing. You reward the behavior you want, you starve the ones you don't. Skinner's original operant conditioning chambers were nicknamed Skinner boxes. And guess what some survivors called the isolation rooms? The box. Now, here's the question nobody wants to ask. If these were just therapy programs, why were they using techniques ripped straight out of military black sites? Because this isn't the first time we've seen this playbook. Next, we go inside the real psychological experiments and ask whether these treatment centers were cover stories. What if these programs weren't just about punishment? What if they were measuring something? How long it takes to wear down a kid? How long until they confess? How long until they comply? Because the tactics used in these teen treatment centers match methods the CIA once classified as experimental interrogation. Let's talk about MK Ultra. If you've never heard of it, here's the short version. It was a real program run by the CIA from the 1950s through the early 70s, where they tested how to break the human mind. We're talking sleep deprivation, isolation, administered substances without consent, hypnosis, electrical aversion treatment, and coerced confession routines. Declassified documents from FOIA requests show that the CIA used these methods to try to erase personalities, then rebuild them from scratch. The rules don't end when you leave. Were there rules or systems that stick with you today?
Yeah, there were some rules that I definitely remember. I remember them just because of how dehumanizing it felt at the time. I already mentioned that we were initially stripped of our name and branded with numbers. So I was not Vanessa, I was VS640. We were not allowed to talk or even make eye contact with the girls in the other groups. If we did, there would be punishments. And I've often wondered if the reasoning behind this was both to make us more docile and also to prevent us from getting together once we were out. How could we? We didn't know each other's names. I don't even know what some of the girls looked like from the other groups. I really don't know what any of them looked like. If we didn't comply with what the counselors wanted or didn't comply fast enough, we were often punished with things like non-com, where we weren't allowed to talk or even be spoken to, which again just added to the humiliation. Things that are so basic, just a part of basic human dignity, like bathroom access, could be sometimes severely restricted. So many of us now have anxiety about that and feel like, hey, if we have an opportunity, we have to go because we don't know when the next opportunity is and if we'll get permission. And those things just sort of stick with you.
They called it psychic driving. You'd be played the same message for hours, sometimes days, over and over again until you broke. The architect of all this? A chemist named Sidney Gottlieb. His specialty? Figuring out how to make someone forget who they are and obey without question. Another name that comes up is John C. Lilly, the guy behind isolation tank research. His work explored how sensory deprivation could be used to control thought patterns. And here's where it gets real uncomfortable. The exact same tools used by intelligence agencies to interrogate foreign enemies started showing up in American teen rehab programs. Provo Canyon School used a system where kids were stripped of all privileges, isolated, and told to confess to fabricated behaviors in order to move up. At Straight Inc., kids were held in silence for days, with sleep cycles deliberately broken and required to repeat back staff approved slogans until they cracked. These aren't rumors. This is from their own intake forms and training logs. And when you compare those logs to declassified MK Ultra procedures, they don't just look similar, they're almost word for word. This wasn't therapy. This was compliance testing. How much pain does it take before you'll say what they want? How many hours until you forget who you were? Some kids folded fast. Some resisted for months. Some never fully came back. And while no one is saying the CIA ran these facilities directly, here's what we do know. In multiple survivor lawsuits, the language used by staff mimicked government black site lingo, like reset protocol, identity restructuring, compliance level adjustment. And here's the kicker. Many of these facilities employed staff with military or corrections backgrounds, not licensed therapists. Some even had experience in seer training used to prepare US soldiers for capture and extreme interrogation scenarios. So now we're here. A generation of American kids were subjected to behavioral experiments under the label of reform, and nobody noticed. But some of those kids didn't just survive, they started talking. And what they exposed goes beyond trauma, it goes into fatalities. Because this system didn't just break kids, sometimes it killed them. When Serenity Denard ran from her facility, she was barefoot. It was 6 degrees outside. No coat, no one followed. She wasn't located for 6 months, and no one was ever charged. Serenity was just 9 years old. She'd been placed in a youth treatment center called Black Hills Children's Home in South Dakota after struggling in foster care. On the morning she ran, a staff member watched her leave and did nothing. The 911 call wasn't made for nearly an hour. By then, it was too late. Her mother told reporters, quote, "I thought I was saving her, but she never came home." Serenity's story isn't the only one. In Utah, Naomi Wood passed away after her symptoms were ignored for days. Staff brushed off her complaints. By the time she was finally taken to a hospital, it was already over. She was just 17. In both cases, the facilities denied wrongdoing. In both cases, the parents had signed away emergency authority. And in both cases, the programs are still operating. Because here's the thing, these losses of life are not anomalies. They're just the ones that made the news. Survivor-run memorial pages, like those maintained by Breaking Code Silence, document dozens of kids who've lost their lives in or after these programs. Self-harm fatalities after isolation, severe food deprivation while earning meals back, restraint injuries, medical neglect, escapees that ended in tragedy. And when lawsuits are filed, the centers pull their favorite move. They disappear. Court filings show that many of these programs are owned through LLCs, shell corporations, or religious nonprofits. When legal heat rises, they just rebrand and relaunch under a new name. Former employees at Agape, Provo, and Ivy Ridge have shown up. Same roles, same methods, at newly opened facilities across state lines. It's like playing legal whack-a-mole. Every time a center gets caught, the operators just shift sideways and keep going. The kids who lost their lives don't get new names. They don't get to start over. But the people who ran the places linked to their deaths, they do. And the parents? Often silenced with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. If they want to settle, they have to sign, which means no speaking, no interviews, no warnings to the next family. But even in hell, a few people tried to remind them they were still human. Was there anyone, another kid or even a staff member, who gave you hope or support?
Yes. I had one girl who did whisper me her real name for her privacy. I won't mention it now, but we really clicked. Felt like we were battle buddies. We would share together. We were good friends, and just having that connection while I was there really helped me through it. But then there was also one man, I can't remember his name exactly, but I think his last name was Chaparro. And we actually were taught how to paddle with him, how to paddle in canoes. And it was such a bright spot in what otherwise was hell. It was an escape, it was something fun, and we all just loved it. And after he kind of taught us the basics, we even ended up doing a whole trip with him in a river many, many miles. And this is something that I love even today. I share it with my son. It's something that really stuck with me. And he also did something that he probably doesn't even realize how impactful it was. But he asked me early on where I was from. And I told him I was from Nashville. And so instead of calling me via 640, he would call me Nashville. And it just helped me remember that, I am an individual. I do have my own personal history. I'm a person. And just that little personal touch that he gave, actually, to all of us. I remember another girl in our group was Brooklyn. That little personal touch, it just meant everything at that time. And while I was there, I'll be honest, I had some very dark thoughts. I fantasized about things and how I could do things that I have never since thought of. And I really credit him a large part to helping me keep myself alive while I went through what I went through. And not everyone was able to do that.
So the machine keeps running because every time it fails, it just sheds the skin. And if you're wondering how that's allowed, well, let's follow the money. Because some of these facilities, they're owned by people you've actually heard of. This is where the investigation flips from individual tragedy to systemic immunity. We're not just exposing bad apples. We're showing you the orchard's defense system. If a treatment center gets hit with a lawsuit, it doesn't close. It just changes its name. Same beds, same owners, same trauma. And the money? It never stops flowing. By the time Serenity Denard's story hit the news, the program that failed her had already filed new business licenses under a different name. South Dakota's Secretary of State records show Children's Home Society quietly transferring assets to Black Hills Children's Ranch. That's not a one-off, that's the playbook. Let's talk about WASP. The Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs was once the Walmart of the troubled teen industry. Over 60 affiliated facilities operating across 7 countries. Thousands of kids, most without any oversight. When public pressure and lawsuits mounted in the early 2000s, the WWASP dissolved. But like a hydra, its pieces reemerged with new names. Red Cliff Ascent, Cross Creek Manor, Academy at Ivy Ridge, and a dozen more you've never heard of, until it's too late. Many of these programs operate as a 501c3 nonprofit, giving them tax-exempt status while pulling in millions. Others rebrand as Christian boarding schools, ducking around state inspections using religious exemption loopholes. IRS filings show that some of these nonprofits pay their executives 6-figure salaries while the kids they house sleep on concrete floors. And when complaints are filed, they bring in the actors. Survivor networks have documented entire campaigns of paid testimonials, scripted success stories, and even fake alumni accounts posting on social media. It's not a cover-up, it's marketing. And then there's the political firewall. Senate lobbying disclosures show that multiple TTI, teen treatment industry operators, have paid firms to lobby against federal oversight, particularly the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. Why? Because if the feds step in, the business model collapses. And that's a model backed by serious money. In 2022 alone, the troubled teen industry generated over $23 billion in private placements, faith-based facilities, and court-mandated programs. And just like Big Tobacco or Big Pharma, they've built a wall. Civil lawsuit outcomes show how facilities avoid real accountability. They settle quietly, enforce NDAs, transfer ownership, reopen under a new banner, and repeat. It's not broken. It's built like this. Parents think they're sending their child to a program, but they're actually entering a machine, one designed to stay one step ahead of regulation, exposure, or justice. So when people say, well, if it's so bad, why hasn't it been shut down? Well, the answer is simple. Many have been shut down, but it was never meant to be shut down. It was meant to be profitable, to be invisible, and above all, to be legal. But that only explains how it stays alive. It doesn't explain why it was built in the first place. And that question leads somewhere even darker. This is where the story leaves the courtroom and enters your living room. You just finished watching Wayward on Netflix. You cried, you posted about it, and then you moved on. Meanwhile, the places it's based on, they're still open. Here is a survivor's take on Netflix's Wayward. Recently, Netflix has produced a series, a show called Wayward. But I'm curious to hear your perspective on Wayward and what your feelings are on that movie.
Okay, so first I have to say I have not seen Wayward yet. I heard it's horror genre, and that is definitely not my genre. But I gotta be honest with you, anything that is gonna bring to light this industry, even if it's in a fictionalized way, I think is a positive thing. So I know there was the documentary with Paris Hilton a few years ago, and she's been very active, including trying to pass legislation for more oversight. And I could not be happier because now this idea is in people's heads and it's, on people's mouths, on their mind. And I hope that Wayward will bring and shine more light on this so that other children don't have to endure the same thing that we did.
In 2025, Netflix dropped Wayward, a drama about a teenage girl sent to a remote high-control reform school. No mention of real places, no disclaimer that it's based on true events, no call to action, just a gut punch story followed by silence. Whether intentional or not, that silence functions like a strategy. It gives audiences a cathartic story without pointing to any institution still operating in the real world. And it's not a new playbook. Girl Interrupted told the story of psychiatric manipulation, but softened it into a quirky coming of age. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest exposed the brutality of institutional control, but turned Nurse Ratched into a meme. Even This Is Paris, the 2020 YouTube doc where Paris Hilton described her abuse at Provo Canyon School, made headlines for a week, then vanished. Meanwhile, Provo Canyon School stayed open. It's still open today. So the question is, why do these stories get told but never resolved? Here's what's in the record. U.S. intelligence agencies have long maintained entertainment liaison offices, shaping scripts and inserting messaging to influence public perception. The CIA's Entertainment Liaison Office, the Pentagon's Hollywood Office. These partnerships helped craft films like Enemy of the State, Zero Dark 30, and even Captain Marvel. But what about Wayward? Well, there's no direct evidence yet of intel agency involvement, but here's what we do know. Some people will say, well, Wayward's just a horror story. And yeah, it is. But horror doesn't come from nowhere. It borrows from real fears, real systems, and real survivors. The haunted backdrop of Wayward wasn't dreamed up in a vacuum. It's the same blueprint survivors of reform schools have been describing for decades, which means when Netflix calls it fiction, the system gets plausible deniability, and the public gets to look away. Netflix has partnered with multiple government agencies on previous projects, especially when national security themes are involved. FOIA filings show Netflix previously collaborated with the DoD and Homeland Security on projects like Designated Survivor. So when they release a show about reform camps, but scrub out the names of real institutions, you have to ask, is this really awareness or just horror with the safety rails on? Because That's the trick. The fear feels real, the catharsis feels real, but the accountability vanishes. It's a pressure release valve dressed up as a ghost story. So, when people say, well, at least they're talking about it, you have to ask, talking how? Framing who? Ending where? Because this isn't fiction adapting reality, it's reality being rewritten so no one remembers the original script. But if the script is being rewritten, then who wrote the first draft? So let's stop here. Before we go any deeper, let's take a breath. Not every parent who sends their kid away is a villain, and not every program is a prison. Some kids really are in crisis: self-injury, harmful behavior, substance struggles, and some families don't know where else to turn. These institutions, the ones we've been showing you, they didn't all start as nightmares. Many of them were sold as hope. Here's a testimonial from a parent. Quote, "It was either this or I was going to lose my daughter." One program director wrote, "We're trying to save lives, not ruin them." And sometimes it worked. Some teens came home clean, got their GED, built a life. So here's the truth. Not every troubled teen program is harmful. Not every staffer is a bad actor. Not every parent made a mistake. But DOJ civil rights investigations reveal widespread systemic violations across multiple facilities. U.S. Senate hearings found patterns of abuse, medical neglect, and cover-ups. Thousands of lawsuits have been filed over the last 30 years. Dozens of teens have died. This isn't just a few bad apples. This is a documented pattern, and it's still happening. So let's be honest. Some families are acting from desperation. Some staff are just undertrained, not cruel. Some institutions may have started with good intentions, but good intentions don't erase lives lost. And the system? It's set up to protect itself, not the kids. Whistleblowers get silenced, families sign NDAs, and programs rebrand before the lawsuits even settle. So no, we're not here to paint with a broad brush. We're here to cut through the fog. Because when a survivor says they confined me to a shed and called it therapy, you don't need a PhD in psychology to know that's not treatment. That's trauma with a price tag. And here's the stat that should stop you cold. In one 5-year span, the US Government Accountability Office documented over 1,500 cases of mistreatment in youth residential programs, just the ones that were reported. So, if you're still unsure, good. That means you're paying attention. Because doubt isn't the enemy here, silence is. We're not here to sensationalize. We're here because someone has to look, and someone has to listen. And what we're about to show you next might explain how it all began. The origin story, the dark root behind it all, and how a single idea grew into an industry. A boy named Tommy ran away from home. He didn't hurt anyone, he just didn't listen. In 1970, that was enough to get him sent to a place called the Elon School. They shaved his head, they made him fight other boys for food, they called it therapy. Now, Tommy is a fictionalized composite based on real survivor accounts. The Elon School was real. But Elon wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. The blueprint for America's troubled teen industry didn't begin with silence. It began with sin. In the early 20th century, religious reform schools popped up across the US, especially in the South. They weren't run by psychologists. They were run by pastors, preachers, and prison guards. Their goal wasn't healing, it was obedience. Kids were harshly disciplined, isolated, humiliated, and deprived of food, all in the name of breaking the will of the rebellious child. They didn't call it abuse, they called it salvation. By the 1950s, a new player entered the chat: behavior psychology. Psychologists like B.F. Skinner were experimenting with operant conditioning, punishment and reward systems to shape behavior like lab rats. And guess who took notes? Programs like Synanon, The Seed, and Straight Inc. emerged in the 60s and 70s, applying addiction treatment models to kids who weren't those in recovery. They borrowed from military training, cult psychology, and prison rules. And when the lawsuits started stacking up, they just rebranded. New names, new locations, same blueprint. Here's some of the receipts. Synanon's aggressive confrontation therapy directly influenced later teen boot camps. Straight Inc., co-founded by Melvin Sembler, who later became U.S. ambassador. DOJ reports confirm severe emotional impact from confrontation therapy used in these early models. The founders of many modern teen programs weren't licensed therapists. The system wasn't designed by doctors, it was designed by true believers. When we say these programs were based on belief systems, we don't mean religion. We mean the belief that a child must be broken to be saved. But what if they weren't trying to save the kids at all? What if the real goal was to turn pain into profit? Because behind every ideology, there's always someone watching the money. And what came next wasn't about helping kids, it was about building an empire. You'd think this would have all collapsed under the weight of its own mistreatment reports. But it didn't. It scaled. Not because it worked, but because it paid. By the early 2000s, the troubled teen industry had become just that, an industry. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar pipeline, not run by one shady doctor in the woods, but by corporate chains, church megafunds, private equity groups, and lobbying arms that knew exactly how to milk desperate parents, overwhelmed courts, and emotionally struggling kids. Let's break down how it worked. First up, per head funding. Whether it was a religious boot camp in Utah or a wilderness program in Montana, the formula was the same. You charge per kid per day, anywhere from $250 to $900 a night. Some programs even billed insurance companies using vague mental health codes, despite having no licensed therapists on staff. And the longer you kept a kid, the more money you made. This wasn't about healing, it was about retention. Then you have the church networks and referral ministries. Some of the biggest feeders into these programs weren't psychologists, they were pastors. Entire church networks created referral systems, telling parents their child was lost and that salvation required obedience and isolation. In exchange, discounts, tithes, sometimes even recruitment bonuses. The trauma pipeline was sold as tough love, but behind the curtain, it was a cash cow. Then you have the court funnel. In some counties, judges were allowed to recommend specific facilities. And in a few truly corrupt cases, they got kickbacks for doing it. Kids caught with marijuana, truancy, shoplifting, all got routed to the same therapeutic lockdown programs. Facilities that had never passed a real inspection. Some without functioning plumbing, working AC, or certified medical staff. You weren't just punished, you were processed. And then we have the parent trap advertising. There were the marketing firms, paid to flood desperate parents with expert articles, 1-800 helplines, and glowing online reviews. Except those reviews were often fake. Those experts, just call center agents reading scripts. There were even consultants who charged thousands to tell you where to send your kid, only to collect a second fee from the very facility they recommended. The calls were coming from inside the house. Then, private equity gets involved. By the mid-2010s, this wasn't even mom and pop anymore. Companies like Bain Capital and other private equity firms began acquiring chains like Aspen Education Group, rolling dozens of treatment centers into streamlined portfolios. The pitch wasn't healing kids, it was streamlining operations and increasing length of stay. Translation: keep the kids longer, cut the costs, boost the margins. And guess what? It worked. One 2020 report estimated the US troubled teen industry was worth over $23 billion annually. That's more than the NFL. This wasn't just abuse in the dark, it was business in broad daylight. And the question becomes, if an industry like this can survive decades of whistleblowers, lawsuits, exposés, and fatal incidents involving minors, what does that say about us? They told us these places were here for help, that these were troubled teens who needed structure, discipline, God. They told us it was tough love. But that was the first lie. Because once you locked the doors, it wasn't love at all. It was power. They weren't just harming kids emotionally, they were testing the silence, measuring how much pain could happen behind closed doors before the rest of us noticed. And here's the part nobody wants to admit. It worked. We laughed at the memes, binged the docuseries, said, "Wow, that's crazy," and went right back to scrolling. If lawmakers or the public were listening right now, what would you want them to understand?
Well, I would like people to know that my experience is not unique. There are thousands of people who have had similar experiences, and too many people have been traumatized, have been abused, have been injured, and have died. And so, what I would ask legislators is to increase DCF oversight, to require independent monitoring, have unannounced inspections so that the children aren't forced to do labor to help them pass. And we need clear accountability when these facilities violate standards. We also need to make sure that children can contact their parents privately, that we can have free communication with our parents. They're responsible for us ultimately, but how can they react if something like abuse is going on if they don't know about it? So we need to have these private conversations. We need to be able to report when abuse is happening, and a way to do that. And we also need to have the children in these facilities actually getting therapeutic care. As I mentioned, I saw a psychiatrist once upon intake, and that was it. That was the extent of the therapy. That's what our parents were paying $5,000 a month for. There needs to be some type of regulations that if you send a child to one of these supposed therapeutic camps, that's actually what's happening. Because right now, that's not a requirement. So, combined with the lack of oversight, combined with the lack of communication, that is what has allowed these facilities to get away with these atrocities that they have to this point.
So maybe the real horror isn't what they did to the kids. Maybe it's what we didn't do for them. The petitions we didn't sign, the questions we didn't ask, the names we never learned. Because if this was never about broken kids, then maybe it was about breaking the rest of us, quietly, systematically, until we stopped noticing cages, even when they looked just like schools, even when the locks were labeled love, even when the scars were invisible. The question now isn't whether this happened. The question is, what would you have done if it was your kid? And what will you do now that you know? If you can talk directly on screen right now to other survivors, what would you say to them?
I would like to tell them that their experiences were real and their feelings about it are valid. It's true that a lot of people aren't going to understand or believe. So I highly, highly encourage you to find other survivors and check out different survivor led organizations like Unsilenced or Breaking Project Silence so that you can share your story if you're ready, or just get connected to other people who can understand what you're going through. I think many people could also benefit from therapy. Again, because of these documentaries and because of Wayward, a lot of therapists are now aware about this troubled teen industry. So they can kind of help you go through the emotions that might come with that. Um, just know you're not alone. There are other people who understand the pain you are in, and you are not just that pain, and you matter.
I just want to say once again, thank you for speaking out. It takes incredible strength to revisit these memories, and your voice is not only valid, it's vital. Every time a survivor speaks, it chips away at the silence that lets this system continue. If there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's that you are not defined by what was done to you. You're defined by the fact that you're here, telling the truth and making sure the next generation knows.
Well, I just want to thank you for having me. I am thrilled that you are willing to discuss this topic, and I feel honored that you would ask me to talk about it. And as you know, we discussed earlier, if any of your viewers have any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. At this point, I'm an open book and I want to expose this industry as much as we can so that we can get the oversight that we need.
And to those watching, it's easy to hear these stories and think, well, that's sad, and then move on. But this isn't history, it's happening right now. So ask yourself, what will you do with what you just heard? These programs weren't accidents, they were designed, built to break people. Not every kid made it out, and the ones who did carried the silence like a second sentence. But silence doesn't protect us, it just protects the people who got away with it. So if this episode shook something loose in you, or helped you name something you went through, then know this: you are not crazy, you are not weak, you are not alone, and it's not too late to tell the truth, even if it's just to yourself. Because the more light we shine, the less room there is for monsters to hide. If you want to help that light grow, please share this. Not for clicks, but because you never know who needs to hear it. Until next time, stay human, stay kind, and remember, no matter what they tell you, the story still matters and the truth is still out there.